All right, hey, how we doing out there, guys? So, welcome back to another episode of the Bastion Black Performance Podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of Russian operations in Ukraine as it sits right now. I've kind of taken a little bit of time off. Again, like I said, I like to primarily deal with kind of larger scale, more interesting sides of it versus being one of the guys who does kind of the really like day to day update stuff. I listen to those guys, in podcasts and videos and stuff, and then I kind of stick more to the bigger picture stuff. And then I had computer issues, so I ended up being able to get kind of my computer stuff fixed. Otherwise, most of my screen was like green or pink, so you couldn't see what was going on. So using maps and trying to do a podcast was kind of out of the question at that point. And then I had a couple other people's podcasts related to shooting and grappling and stuff that I did. So I just kind of so it's been about a month now. So currently it is August 9th, 2022. So it's a Tuesday and it is 18:21 p.m. So let's kind of talk about what's going on in Ukraine as it sits right now. So kind of some interesting developments that have taken place. If I had to kind of describe, like, kind of start with the interesting stuff up front, we'll get into the details as we go, is that it appears that currently Ukraine has now taken a hold of the strategic initiative. So, again, strategic versus operational versus tactical initiative. And what I mean by that is that because of Ukraine's, you could call them counterattacks or just, because of the HIMARS and other such systems that they've gotten from the United States and other Western nations, their ability to attack, large ammunition depots and concentrations of troops significantly behind the lines have caused kind of a significant shifting, as far as the Russians have done, of troops and their concentration and stuff like that. And so what it's kind of, means is that for sort of the first time right now is Ukraine can kind of dictate what they fight over, at least on a strategic sense. It doesn't mean that they, tactically they can go wherever they want or they can initiate the artillery duel, in their favor whenever they want. It doesn't mean that. What it means is that right now they can kind of pick and choose where the emphasis is, and they're picking to emphasize counterattacking in the Kherson area, which is down here, as well as local counterattacks in the Slavyansk, Izium, Lyman, kind of area there. So that's a pretty big development, and for the Ukrainians, it's definitely good. There's been a lot of talk that we're going to see, the massive counterattack of the Ukrainians come end of summer, early fall, something like that. And I don't think this is that. As it sits right now, they're still significantly outgunned in total artillery, both tubes, i.e., the number of guns or rocket launchers that they have, and ammunition. But they've definitely been able to chew into the Russians' ability to utilize their artillery in a significant way by attacking their concentration of their ammo depots, and then Russia has had a significant decrease in the number of drones that they have, the number of drone sorties they're able to operate, and just the overall quality, which I think is one reason why you saw kind of in the news here recently that Russia sort of struck a deal with Iran to get, I think it was like 700 drones. They didn't get that many yet. That's kind of a signal, not so much like, oh, hey, this is like, our friend that's helping us out, and more like, hey, this is a drone war, especially in terms of artillery and observation and things, and then we can't afford to fall any more behind than we are on that. So I think, especially now that Ukraine is starting to have systems. So, I mean, the HIMARS and the M270 MLRS is, kind of an obvious one, as far as an artillery system, a rocket artillery system that has significant range. But even most of the Western artillery pieces outrange all of the Russian stuff of comparable, caliber or level. Like the Panzerhaubitze 2000, so the German, the the armored howitzer 2000 155 self-propelled gun. It has a maximum range of something like 60 kilometers with rocket assisted projectiles. Which significantly with outranges its Russian competition, not by a ton, but it does something like by like 3 miles or so. So all those things tend to matter. And then the Western systems are significantly more accurate, and they have better types of ammunition. So things like the Excalibur round and other guided munitions and stuff like that is definitely starting to play a significant role. In how those things are going. But I would not say we've reached the stage yet where you could consider some sort of massive Ukrainian counterattack. Everything, for the most part, is just them being able to, they're kind of, they're picking at the scab, and they're able to, like pick a little bit more and kind of working from that angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start myself up here, kind of in the northeast, so around Kharkov, and I'm just going to work myself around counterclockwise, just because geographically that's simple. That doesn't mean that that's the start with the most important. So as we sit right now, we still kind of designate that the Donbass, so the eastern portion of the battlefield here, is the main effort, and then the two supporting efforts are in the north in Kharkov and in the south in Kherson. But realistically, you could also include Melitopol and the Zaporizhia Oblast stuff in this area here. So we'll get my Kharkov map out, and we'll kind of so we'll start up with that. So not a lot of changes, around here. So like we said, let me flash over my Google map real quick, just so we can kind of remember where we're at here. And let's pull out our terrain. Okay, so Kharkov up here. So remember, Kharkov sits on a bunch of, it's a good road hub, especially for, Belgorod coming out of Russia here. And so obviously, so the Ukrainians controlling it is big for them, controlling all of these kind of highways and sub roads and things like that. So when we flash back over here, so we see this is obviously, Kharkov itself. And so the Ukrainians, have the Russians pushed back. They're still within artillery range and still within rocket artillery range, and definitely within, air attack range of Russian weapon systems. But the Russians obviously at one point were kind of in this ring road area. So now it does appear that the Russians have shifted forces from this, Izium Sloviansk, kind of area down here up. There you go. Up into the Kharkov area. And Putin himself said something to the effect of, he wants Kharkov taken. Now, whether that's, him saying words just to try to get people's attention on stuff, we don't really know. But why Kharkov is important is, so you see kind of these dotted lines. So these are on highways here, but this represents what we call the ground lines of communication, i.e. the routes that you take from Russia on the ground to get supplies, troops, equipment, whatever, to the south. So this is the Izium, Lyman area, north of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk down there in the Donbass. And so they need to keep the Ukrainians far enough away here that they can't easily bring these ground lines of communication under consistent indirect fire. So obviously it's close enough now. They can definitely hit them with, occasional munitions and things like that. But they cannot let the Ukrainians get, kind of into this area here, where now they can have their artillery safely set up in a place where they can regularly bombard these roads. Because obviously what that would mean is that with the easy road being taken away, it's not that there's no other roads, but obviously if the easiest, shortest route is taken, you have to take a route that's not as easy, not as short. The road's not as good quality. And then the fewer roads that you have, the more damage that the roads take, the more issues, things like traffic jams and stuff like that. And historically speaking, that's a very normal problem to have, which is, too few roads or an insufficient road network to support the size of the operation that one intends to conduct around there. So, conversely, if you're the Russians, threatening Kharkov it's a smart idea because one, I believe it's the second most populous city in Ukraine, but also the Ukrainians need to keep this obviously free of Russians. So you need to keep enough pressure on Kharkov at all times that the Ukrainians have to feed units in here that they could, use somewhere else. So, obviously, and that's just completely standard normal, tactic when it comes to that. So they need to, press this, whether they really intend to, attack Kharkov proper or take it over or not. They need to make the Ukrainians invest in it so that they can keep the Ukrainians more spread out, and then hopefully they themselves, i.e. the Russians, could concentrate somewhere, where they're able to force a more decisive operational or strategic into things. So now there hasn't been a lot of really substantial, movement back and forth of the front lines and stuff like that. Lots of basically daily artillery, rocket, air attacks, stuff like that. So pretty standard stuff as far as the Kharkov front stuff goes. So again, so we'll kind of move ourselves, in a little bit of Kharkov, or in a, whoops, that's not the one, that's not the one, that's not the one. Let me find my correct map here. So, here we go. it's just I forgot to pull that up. So anyway, so we'll kind of so we'll look at our Sloviansk and Kramatorsk stuff here. So obviously in the Donbass, and I like these guys. So this is military land. You know, their maps are pretty good. It's always like kind of one day behind, which sort of sucks. But I do like, you know, they do a good job of trying to put a lot of like individual units and stuff in. I always take any map that you get from anyone, take it with a grain of salt, just because, you know, it's not like this is a video game where you're getting real time exact feedback on things like that. But so as we said, so we moved down from Kharkov. We moved down into this area here. So obviously, so this is, you know, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, you know, kind of sitting in the Donbass. And so why this is important is, so obviously, you know, over here, this is our Seversky Donetsk River, and this is where Lysychansk and Severodonetsk and those places are. This actually just slightly cuts it off, which kind of sucks. But Izium is just right up here. You know, and so so if we're kind of, let me flash back out here quickly to my full map. So we're in Sloviansk and Kramatorsk right here. And so why this is important is, so obviously we still have a little bit of a salient here, but obviously this represents the Donbass here. And so what this also does is Sloviansk and Kramatorsk sit astride major north-south running highways. And this is another standard problem or concern when it comes to warfare, which is that just getting roads or just getting a city or just getting an area is one thing, but you have to take cities that have their transport that's oriented in the direction that you need them to be oriented. And so in this case, so obviously Sloviansk sits more or less astride this M03 highway, which is, you know, kind of runs from the northwest to the southeast, but it also sits astride these couple slightly smaller sub-highways. But so getting that would be able to, they could really completely connect the northern half and the southern half of their pincers that they have there. Now, a couple things that we see. So Sloviansk is still a pretty significant distance away. So this is approximately, you know, 10 or 15 kilometers. So you're looking at, you know, like, you know, 6 to 10 miles. And this is obviously kind of swampy ground and everything right there. So there's a reason why there hasn't been a ton of movement, you know, in this area, because one is kind of swampy ground. You know, there's bridges and things along there. So let's pan out to our Google map here so we can see a little bit better. There we go. So we're talking about in this area here. So we came down from Kharkov. So major highway systems that run down through Izium, all right, and then Lyman, and then here's our, dang it, I hate when I hit that. So here's our Sloviansk and Kramatorsk right there. So if we look at this, so this is the Seversky Donetsk River and, you know, kind of the associated wetlands or whatever you want to call all of this stuff here. So it's one reason why there hasn't been a ton of movement in this area. There's also, you know, kind of bridges across here that the Ukrainians have, you know, either, you know, controlled or blown up, you know, on, you know, canals and smaller like sub rivers there. So it's a very tough nut to crack. It's also why when we're looking from the same thing, the Russians are trying very hard to assault Bakhmut there. So we'll flash back out here. So we look. So this is the Bakhmut area right here. Sorry, a little too far south of Donetsk. So our Bakhmut area right here. So so the reason that they're trying to assault Bakhmut. So Bakhmut obviously sits astride multiple roads as well, and as we can see, they're much closer to that, and this would allow them to bypass, you know, kind of the entirety of this terrain that they're still a little like kind of sub-salient here, and potentially if they could open up one, now this ground gets to be into you know, something they can move a lot quicker through, then they could potentially create these kind of pockets, these cauldrons up here, instead of the problem with doing the, you know, kind of the quote-unquote steamroller tactics that I've mentioned in previous videos is that it's a very good way, if you have complete superiority in, you know, artillery numbers and quality and stuff like that, it's a very good way to relatively easily move an enemy back. You just decimate everything in front of you, move into it, move your artillery up, decimate everything in front of you, move up, you know, kind of over and over. But a couple things that, you know, happens with this. One, you devastate the ground. So one, like, you know, the villages, the houses, the stuff like that. But also, you know, and things that we know coming out of World War I, when you had such a, you know, a long periods of time of concentrated artillery fire, is that you can't really move not only vehicles and horses and things through there, but even, you know, like foot mobile troops, you know, when you have the ground be that saturated with craters and unexploded ordnance and just like trees that have been hit and fallen down and all that, and creates like just legitimately like difficult obstacles as far as just basic travel stuff goes. The other other problems is, one, it's really slow. So if you're on any sort of like timeline, it's going to take you an awful long time to do that. And the Ukrainians, are obviously in a position where they're basically trying to stall for time, get better weapons, get more training, get better equipment, things like that. From the United States, from other Western, other European nations. So if they can keep their own casualties and their own relative equipment loss low or within acceptable levels, whatever they decide that is, and then they can slow the Russians down, for them it's all gravy. Whereas the Russians are definitely under much more of a time crunch. But they haven't been able to launch any sort of like substantial breakouts and get into really like legitimate mobile warfare. And it's definitely and in the modern realm, it's a problem. Like I think I said it in my last video. I kind of like the Heinz Guderian quote. So his quote, like in German, was like "Kletzen nicht kleckern," which basically means like "boot 'em, don't spatter 'em," is kind of how they translate it. And so what he basically meant by that is like the key to the mobile warfare and the advance in the armored realm is that you have to hit an enemy concentrated enough in an area and fast enough in an area that you punch into and through their line, and then you basically outpace their retreat or their withdrawal as you keep going. Whereas if you hit an enemy too dissipated and you just push them back, where they're basically withdrawing at the speed that you're advancing, you never really fully compromise the operational level of the battlefield or the strategic level of the battlefield. And so for, in this particular case, so the operational level of the battlefield would be these towns like Bakhmut, like Siversk, and even more so Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, for certain is, you take a town like Bakhmut, controls this whole road network. Now, the Ukrainians probably don't just retreat back to here. Their main defensive line then has to go back to this M03 highway over here closer to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. And so those are the types of the types of objectives that bring about like legitimate like paralyzation and collapse of a battle zone, of an enemy's defensive system. Whereas as you just continually grind forward slower and slower, so you kind of take these areas here. So Siversk, obviously sits astride, some roads and stuff here. So that would still be big for them. But kind of think about this, like this is all just basically territory. It's fields, it's trees, it's things like that. So it's not that it has no value, but just taking control of that doesn't necessarily, and realistically, it doesn't get you any closer to victory if you're the Russians. So they need to try to achieve superiority of force somewhere, but as I kind of mentioned, is the Ukrainians being able to sort of clap back at them with, HIMARS and some localized counteroffensives and things like that, have really, definitely stifled that. And then the Russians got really ground down in, Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and all those things. So they're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as, troops go. So we'll kind of continue our clockwise delineation here. So we'll move over to the Zaporizhia front. So I don't like this particular map because it kind of cuts off all the good stuff that we need over here. You know what? I actually don't think I'm going to use this one. Let's flash back out to our full map, and I'll give you guys a little bit of an idea of where we're at. So we just came from this kind of major salient and these couple sub-salients over here. And so now this is kind of all part of the same operations in the Donbass here. But now we go over to the Zaporizhia front, and this, kind of north of Melitopol here. And so why this is important is, one, obviously there's multiple crossings on the Dnieper here as you start to move north. And then there's a major nuclear power plant here, the Zaporizhia power plant. It's actually not really close to the city of Zaporizhia. It's over here, and we'll flash to that on the actual map here in a second. But as the... not to combine too many things together, but as the Ukrainians are counterattacking over here and they're cutting the abilities of the Russians to cross the lower Dnieper here, one, it's definitely going to hamper their abilities to, supply, bring equipment, troops, things like that. But also, it severely limits their front. Like they're only able to, kind of attack on a narrow front, whereas being able to stretch the Ukrainians out and then, potentially force multiple additional crossings would be big for them. Pardon me. Okay, so we'll flash back out here. So as I said, we just there we go. So we just left the Bakhmut area here, and so now we're in the Zaporizhzhia area. So the front line, as you kind of saw, basically stretches more or less kind of parallel to what this sort of east-west running, kind of coast of the Dnieper here is, and kind of runs over this direction. So Melitopol is kind of the major, kind of hub in the area, and it has the major north-south running, road going through it. And then over here in Enerhodar, however you say that. This is the nuclear power plant. It sits right on the river. And I've read that it's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, and I feel like I read somewhere else that was the largest nuclear power plant in the world. I don't know which one of those is true. Well, I guess technically if it's the largest in the world, then both of them are true. So this is, it's been a major, it's been in the news a lot lately because the Russians are, moving equipment into the area, having artillery, whether firing from there, storing things from there, which is obviously, well, one, it's clever, let's be honest. Like it's, having your artillery in a place where the enemy cannot counterattack it for risk of just absolute total humanitarian calamity is, it's a smart idea. I mean, it's definitely a dick move, but it's a smart idea. It's definitely, it's something that there's in the news a lot, and there's unconfirmed and likely false reports that the Russians have like mined parts of the nuclear power plant or whatever. I haven't seen anything that says that that's legitimate. But so we also look at where this sits. So this is kind of an odd, so the river makes a large turn here. So there's been a lot of operations, shelling, air ops against Nikopol, and things like that. So obviously there's no major crossings along the Dnieper here. So you have Dnieper City, you have Zaporizhzhia itself here, so there's crossings of the river. But then to actually get bridge crossings, you have to come all the way down to Nova Kakhovka here, the dam. And so the Russians being able to operate here and threaten cities like Nikopol that sit astride major, highways and roads is definitely a big deal. And then the other thing that would kind of sit, so let's flash back to our full map again here. So if we see where the Russians are, so they're pulled up here. So they're still significantly south of, Kryvyi Rih, and they're definitely still, southwest of Nikopol. But they're pushed up about level with, this, with kind of this east to west running southern bank of the river there. And so, there we go. Oops, froze up on me. There we go. So the Russians are up to about here. So, where the Kherson Oblast, kind of border is. So them being able to use artillery in the nuclear power plant and, assault Nikopol keeps the Ukrainians, from being able to significantly, marshal their troops and concentrate troops and artillery to be able to, assault the flank of the Russians. So obviously, so if the Russians are approximately up to about this line here, so if you're the Ukrainians being able to have troops and or like weapons over here, you can now assault the flank of the Russians. And as we see, the road network over here is not good at all. So you have kind of just these, smaller highways. So realistically, if we assume the Russians are essentially up to here, it basically means they're using this highway here and this highway here, which are small roads. So for them, for the Ukrainians being able to like assault that is obviously super important, and for the Russians, having something like, their artillery over here around the nuclear power plant is obviously, it's something that works. Again, it's a dick move, but it works. And then, the other thing that aids them is having, a river that in a large scale is impassable outside of the bridges and the couple ferries that are down in Kherson here. Having artillery and units over here is a good way to let them get relatively close to their targets when they may be starting to be outranged by, the superior Western artillery that's coming in, and still be, effective. And then conversely, I don't know exactly what units the Russians have operating in the area, but the smart thing to do if you're the Russians and if you're the Ukrainians would be to have, marine units or amphibious units, traverse across the river, conduct raids, conduct reconnaissance. Otherwise, be able to just cause some mayhem. Maybe even just things as simple as like, deliver some, munitions and some weapons to, partisan, guerrilla forces that are operating, on the Ukrainian side over here. So, control the river and, just operating around that's definitely, it's, kind of an obvious thing, but definitely important there. So let's flash to our Kherson map here. So Kherson's where kind of most of the big stuff's been going on lately. So the Ukrainians, with the multiple HIMARS that they have, so they have attacked this bridge here, which is like the Antonovsky Bridge. So there's only two ways across the river, as far as bridges go, and that's this one here, the Antonovsky Bridge, and then the dam bridge that goes across at Nova Kakhovka here. And so the Ukrainians, while they haven't completely destroyed the bridge, they basically hit it with HIMARS enough times. There's videos and pictures out that it's so significantly damaged that you can't fit major military traffic going across it. And so it's essentially out of action for them. There's still a ferry that operates there, but the ferry looks like it can only handle, I guess what you'd consider kind of like light industrial type of traffic. So like, trucks are larger trucks, but you can't put tanks on it, or armored vehicles, stuff like that. And then obviously you have the dam here. So the Russians again, so they've been using the dam because they know that the Ukrainians can't attack it. I mean, they can attack it, but to attack the dam and to damage the dam would essentially doom the entire civilian population of everything below it, to include Kherson and all this. So from a purely tactical military standpoint, that might be a perfectly legitimately good idea. But, like I've talked about in other videos, if the Ukrainians, one thing that you have to be conscious of and you have to be careful with is you have to make sure that your citizens still believe that you are on their side, that you're doing, everything you can to keep them safe. Because obviously this war is a lot about like ethnic related things. So ethnic Russians, ethnic Ukrainians. And so there's certainly some amount of Russian support in probably everything east of the Dnieper in Ukraine. And so you want to make sure that you don't inflame that. You don't give the Russians any, metaphoric ammunition as far as that stuff goes. But there is an additional, so there's, kind of a rail bridge that comes across up here as well. And the Ukrainians have attacked that and knocked it out temporarily multiple times. But one thing that you see with that is, so there's only this one crossing, and the Russians have this entire area that they are operating in. And they've moved approximately 25,000 troops from particularly the east into this area. So a couple things that signals is that one, and this is the kind of thing the Russians have talked about as well, is that one, they definitely want to attack Mykolaiv again because their main goal was always to get across to Odessa. I'll go back to my main Google map here. So one of their goals was definitely to go across Kherson, across Mykolaiv, and go to Odessa here. Because if they do that, then they would completely wall the Ukraine off from all of their Black Sea ports and access, to include basically all of their industry. So the areas that they control, starting the Donbass over here, and then all the way, if they got to Odessa, would basically be all of Ukraine's industry. So now, obviously, and they were in Mykolaiv, but they've been pushed back since then. And Mykolaiv crosses this road here, or this river here. And I forget what this river is called. It's a weird name that I had trouble saying last time I tried pronouncing it. But so they got pushed back across there. So so the Russians moving in a bunch of troops means that, one, it looks like they are either gearing up to push towards Mykolaiv or potentially move towards, Kryvyi Rih here. And so a couple things that could signify is if they did push all the way up here to Kryvyi Rih, one, it would give them access to an additional highway road system to Odessa to kind of bypass Mykolaiv. And maybe that would mean that they were then going to try to assault Dnieper City or something. I guess I don't know. Like, based on everything we've seen of the Russians so far in this war and everything we kind of know about their deployment right now, I think the further that they attack, the worse everything gets for them. Because as it sits right now, this is the sole place that they have right here to move major equipment across, is this dam at Nova Kakhovka here. And so they got to be awfully careful with what they do there. I'm assuming they have some sort of idea. But if you're the Ukrainians, let me flash back to my Kherson map here. Nope, Kherson. So if they're Ukrainians, the Ukrainians have been counterattacking kind of from Mykolaiv slowly for like a month or so now. So the obvious answer would be to try to assault Kherson itself, get the help of local partisans, guerrillas, civilian forces within there, and then essentially cut all these forces off. I mean, I think tactically that would be the obvious choice here. But the other side of things is that if you're Ukraine, you almost want Russia to pump as many, uh, men, as much equipment and everything as you can over here, because as soon as they do that, it has to be supplied, and they only have one way to do it right now. So in a way, you might almost want to just bait them into putting more and more stuff over there. Whether, I mean, that could just be a classic feigned retreat, or just a stepped, a tiered, withdrawal from these areas if the Russians were doing that. So I don't really know, exactly what their end game is with that if you're Russia, because it doesn't. If they're not going to attack directly at Mykolaiv, we'll flash back out to my main Google map here. So if you're not going to try to go for Mykolaiv, and you're going to go to Kryvyi Rih here, you have two options from Kryvyi Rih. Two options that really make any sense. One would be to go to Dnieper City to have an additional crossing of the Dnieper. But as we said before, is the Russian front line in the Zaporizhia Oblast is roughly basically this stretch of the river across to here. So they still don't control anything to connect these up there. So that would definitely be risky. And the closest they are to Dnieper City from the east is Izium. And that's a long distance with no direct routes to it. So that would be an odd choice. So, I mean, the obvious choice would be to try to go back to Mykolaiv to take that over and to cross here towards Odessa. But obviously that failed once already for them. So it's one of those, don't honestly know what their plan is with that. But a couple other things we've seen on this side. So obviously one of the main reasons why the Russians attacked across here, they took over Mariupol, Berdyansk, Taganrog, and places like that are inside of, Russia proper, is they wanted what they call this land bridge. So this highway that runs through Mariupol, Berdyansk, and all that stuff down to the Crimea and across over to Novokakhovka and Kherson. So that way they could have a way directly from Russia that did not involve the Kerch Peninsula. So this is what they call the Kerch Peninsula, like historically a very important part of everything about the Crimea and the Black Sea operations. Is so there's just this one small Kerch bridge. Well, it's not a small bridge, but there's just this one bridge that crosses from the Kerch Peninsula over here into what is, like technically Russia proper itself. So anything that has to come across there comes through here. And you see this is a long distance, like all the way through here. Take these roads. Either you have to go down through Simferopol or up through Zankoy, and then you get up here. So one, that's a really long distance, but also basically everything hinges on that one bridge that crosses the Kerch. And then when you get here, coming out of Crimea, so this is still like kind of a wetland sort of area, there still gets narrowed down to a crossing here and, crossing, through this corridor here. So it's still very susceptible, potentially to being cut off. So things that happened recently, so there's been an attack on a Russian airfield down in this area here. So there's kind of like this is like a major beach, like a tourist location. And so what's funny is like there's all sorts of pictures and videos of like tourists at the beach, observing this airfield that got attacked. And I've read that there was, I've heard people say that there was like fixed wing and rotary wing and like large runways there. I've also heard it written that it was just primarily like a helicopter base, but there's an extremely large concentration of some form of air power there, and numerous very large explosions have taken place. So whether Ukrainians attacked it, I don't know if they could attack it. I mean, as it sits right now, we haven't admitted to giving them the ATA MCS munitions for the HIMARS, which has a range of something like 300 kilometers, which is something close to but not quite 200 miles. So if you look at this distance here, and kind of look at our scale down there. So to the nearest place that the Ukrainians control safely, like up here, I don't know. I mean, just eyeballing it, maybe. It definitely looks like this is too far, so I don't think you could do that. And I don't think the Ukrainians would risk putting the HIMARS somewhere over there, that close to Moldova and Transnistria. So we don't know precisely what it was. The Russians apparently released some sort of press release that said it was somebody smoking or some sort of, it was munitions related accident or whatever, which is definitely possible. Like, there's that kind of that old trope, which is, don't attribute to malice that which could be attributed to incompetence. And anyone who's deployed, gone to war, or whatever is like the thing that you forget is all of the civilian related work type of risks that exist. Not only do they not go away when you go to war, they all get exacerbated because you tend to have a bunch of people doing jobs that they're not particularly well trained at. Even things as simple as like driving Humvees, driving 7 tons, deuce and a halves, trucks, stuff like that. But then you tend to operate in places that are not specifically kind of constructed for that. So you take it for granted, like in America, for example, is like you pretty much drive on roads, you park in parking lots. If you're a truck driver, there's like an actual loading dock and a place where you're supposed to go and all those things. Well, now you kind of have all those problems, but you're in like this sort of makeshift this makeshift headquarters or warehouse or things like that. So you kind of exacerbate that. And kind of use an example from my personal life. So my first deployment, which would have been June of 2004 until like early February 2005, the first KIA that we took in my battalion, this 4 KIA actually, was so we called it the log train, the logistics train. So the battalion had the guys who would deliver supplies to my company's like combat outpost, and it was nighttime, and they left. And as they were driving out of my company's little outpost at this school, we had a serpentine barrier set up on the road. The last Humvee got kind of lost in the dust, and so the serpentine, he should have gone like left and then right and then left. Basically went left and then right and just drove straight into a canal. And it was so dusty and it was dark, and no one saw him until a couple minutes later, and by then the Humvee was in the canal, flipped up on its roof. They couldn't get it flipped back over, and 4 dudes drowned in there. So, technically speaking, that represents, that represented like 13% of the KIA that we took that deployment was just regular old Humvee rollover in the dark. So kind of normal stuff, as far as that goes. So that's kind of the major points. As far as stuff that's going on, the Ukrainians continue to attack an awful lot of depots with artillery. There's been some sort of airfield attack down here. There's also an airfield attack around Melitopol. I forgot about that. So those are big. But again, we don't exactly know what caused this. I don't think the Toshka U, munition that they have, I'm pretty sure this is way out of range for that, so they couldn't get that. So we don't exactly know what caused that yet. But again, those are all positives for Ukraine and very negatives for Russia. And we know that Russia's scraping the bottom of the barrel as far as like parts and being able to repair the equipment related damage that they have currently. And that's probably the thing that's most going to hinder them going forward is they can suffer the losses that they've had thus far. It's certainly far from optimal, and it doesn't look good. And they're definitely having lots of trouble replacing total troop numbers. But I think the thing that's going to be the biggest deal for them, at least as far as strategic implications, geopolitical implications going forward, is that they're going to lose so much of their equipment and have so much of their equipment that they basically don't have the technological ability to repair, that their status in the world, their ability to project force is going to be irrevocably, or maybe not irrevocably, but significantly decreased unless they can get someone like China, Iran, Syria, other people who have access to these types of spare parts that can supply it for them. But that's pretty much all I've got for the night, guys. Again, stuff's current as of when I say it. But if if there's something that I got wrong or whatever, like let me know if there's like updates to that. If you know some things that I don't or have some theories on stuff, like by all means, hit me up in the comments or whatever. But remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.